This is In My Humble Opinion with Charles Lewis and Maxilia Robinson on the People Station 101 Jams. And so I have a special guest in right now to conversate with us a bit about a legacy. It's a man that has a legacy and a great impact here locally and at our university. And so I want to preface this, but before he begins to speak and says his name, I want to say that I knew that this was a great man and a powerful man. But then when I walked through the Department of Medicine, Department of Emergency Medicine over at the University Health System, I saw this plaque for the first time. And it was a painting of none other than Dr. Marcus Martin, the VP and Chief Officer of the Office of Diversity and Equity at the University of Virginia. So how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Charles. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this wonderful show. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you and speaking with you. And, of course, I've known you for a few years also. And the folks hopefully know about all the great work you've been doing and continue to do. So I'm really proud of you as one of my brothers in 100 Black men of Central Virginia. We've accomplished a number of things, but you've taken it further than that and gone to Africa and done some really good things. And hopefully you've talked about that on your show.
Yeah, I have.
Good man.
A little bit. My co-host Maxilia, she makes me talk about myself a little more than I want to. But
right.
Yeah, definitely. So you're the VP and Chief Officer at the university's Office of Equity and Diversity.
Yeah.
And so tell us about the purpose of that office and what's the work that you're doing, the way you outreach throughout the campus.
Yeah, so it's the University of Virginia Office for Diversity and Equity, and I'm the Vice President and Chief Officer for Diversity and Equity. The office was established in 2005, November 2005. And so let me take you a little bit of ways back before the office was established. Mm-hmm. I came to the University of Virginia in 1996 as the first African-American chair of a clinical department in the School of Medicine, and that was the Department of Emergency Medicine. Emergency medicine had been under medicine and surgery historically, and that has happened at other institutions as well. Mm-hmm. But in 1996, it was established as a department, and I came in as the first chair of emergency medicine and the first African-American to chair a clinical department within the School of Medicine. So working there for 11 years as chair, I had the opportunity to see many members from the community come to the hospital. Obviously, people don't want to have to go to the emergency department, but it's a place where care is given for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. And so open door policies, front door of the hospital, saw lots of members of the community come in. And I've been an emergency physician for over 35 years. So I actually practiced at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 15 years before coming here. Did my residency at the University of Cincinnati in the late 70s. And also spent a year on the Navajo Reservation in Gallup, New Mexico, as a general medical officer. And then also worked as what we call a locum tenens physician in a small rural hospital down in North Carolina. So, and even prior to that, worked as a chemical engineer in the paper industry over in Covington, where I grew up.
Wow.
So I've had a lot of great opportunities and various careers, from engineering to medicine, emergency medicine, and now as the Vice President, Chief Officer for Diversity and Equity. Well, in the emergency department, we see a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, a diverse population. I was certainly sensitized over the years to being able to provide, comprehensive care to patients, but also from the diversity perspective, respecting person's background, having to know as much about the gender differences, LGBT community, and so forth. So when I was stepping down from chair after serving 2 terms, I saw this opportunity in the Office for Diversity and Equity. I was actually on the search committee that helped to establish some of the guidelines for the type of person we wanted to hire. And one of the things we established was that the new chief officer coming in, and this was going to be the very first chief officer for Diversity and Equity, would report to the president of the university. So it's a higher level position, part of the president's cabinet, higher visibility, et cetera. So the person who we hired was a guy by the name of Bill Harvey, a good friend of mine, who's actually going to be in town tomorrow, and Bill and I will have dinner together. He's since retired. But he worked at the university in the capacity of Vice President, Chief Officer for Diversity and Equity for about 4.5 years. And then I stepped up from his assistant to associate to interim. And then with President Sullivan's arrival, I was in the interim position, so she appointed me as the Chief Officer for Diversity and Equity.
Gotcha.
And it's different than being in the emergency department, but now I go into the community more, and I'm involved with care, if you want to say that way, of a diverse population on UVA grounds and within Charlottesville community as well. I think this past weekend we held the Charlottesville Community Health Fair. It was the ninth consecutive health fair. It was in conjunction with the 27th African American Cultural Arts Festival. And we did health screenings like we do each year, hemoglobin A1Cs, mammography, youth sports physicals, peripheral artery disease testing, body mass index, blood pressures, and so on, vision and hearing, et cetera. So it's great to get out into the community. The Office for Diversity and Equity gets into the community in a number of different ways. MLK Celebration, for instance, and we can talk a little bit about that if you'd like. Should we go and talk about it?
Sure, absolutely.
When President Sullivan came on board as president of the University of Virginia in 2010, just before she arrived, one question she asked me was, what have we been doing in the community related to MLK Celebration? And I explained to her that there usually would be a few events at the University of Virginia and certainly a few events in town. And we talked about maybe we should ratchet it up some, if I can use that word, or make it a bigger celebration within the community. And rather than being a couple of days or one day, let's hold events over 2 weeks. And that's what we've been doing for the last 6 years. We've been holding celebration around MLK, community celebration, not just MLK Day, but 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of January, consisting of anywhere from 25 to 30 events each year. Getting the community involved, getting the university involved, all of the deans of the 11 schools at the university, I requested them to appoint a committee person to help us with the planning during the year. And then the schools typically will collaborate on various projects or events. It could be a keynote speaker, it could be a panel, it could be music or some other type of entertainment. And so we've had successful MLK celebrations and also events held in the community at Jefferson School, for instance, and some of the local churches, for instance. And, Reverend Edwards is First African, it's Mount Zion First African Baptist Church, has always been a participant. He has a group that he works with each year to put on a fantastic MLK celebration, either at his church or another church in the community. So, community involvement. We established an LGBT committee to address rights related to the LGBT community members. We established a disability advocacy and action committee to address issues around those with disabilities. Women's Leadership Council, I was an original member of that council, and my office continues to coordinate that council addressing gender issues, pay equity issues, that type of thing, child care issues, family leave. So it's a broad base of or diverse types of categories that we look into and we try to assist with. We established President Castine, John T. Castine III. There's an annual award called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Award, and we get some great applications every year, and then we have a luncheon in April celebrating the award winners. And one more, a couple of years ago, I went to President Sullivan and her cabinet, it was April 2013, with the idea of establishing the President's Commission on Slavery in the university. We had a community member, Tierney Fairchild, go with me, and we had a couple of students who were members of the Memorial for Enslaved Labor student group that was established on grounds. And we brought forth some concerns and try to bring to the forefront what a number of other organizations had been doing recently, like UCARE or the University Library or Office of African American Affairs or Whitson Institute, to say we need to recognize the contributions of the enslaved laborers to the university who built the university. And since we made that presentation at the President's Cabinet in April 2013, it was September 2013 that President Sullivan actually gave the green light to go ahead and establish the commission, and we invited members of the community, alums of the university, students, faculty, and staff to participate. And we've had some great successes since we established the President's Commission on Slavery University, and I can certainly tell you about some of those if you'd like to hear that.
Yeah. Sure, absolutely. You can go into that.
Okay,
Sure.
Great. So we established the commission. We had at least 25 people on it, and then we began to think about what are those issues we want to address. Well, one is naming buildings after slaves, and so we were very fortunate to put before the Building Names Committee an opportunity to name the newest dorm Gibbons House after Isabella and William Gibbons. Both of these individuals were husband and wife, and they served, they were slaves at the University of Virginia. She worked in pavilions 5 and 6, keeping house, looking after children, cooking. He worked in pavilion 9, basically as a butler, but they were able to maintain a family, raise a family, and taught their kids how to read. They interacted with the students at the University of Virginia, so both of them were self-educated. Well, upon emancipation, she became the first teacher of color in the Freedmen School, which is now Jefferson School, and he became a minister at First Baptist Church. He actually, some years later, went up to Howard to try to get a divinity degree, an advanced degree, and he didn't complete that. He died at an earlier age than his wife, but they were both revered for their perseverance and their resilience, as slaves at the University of Virginia, but when they were freed, they maintained resilience and they contributed to the community in great ways. So the newest dorm is named Gibbons House. It's a $35 million dorm. First-year students reside in it. This year was the first year the students resided in Gibbons. Last June, we dedicated it, and then there were some members of Gibbons' family, who came down in the fall for a reception. Prior to that, we held a symposium in the fall of 2014. It was actually October. And during that symposium, we dedicated the African American Cemetery at the University of Virginia. And some people may remember that in 2012, the university was planning to expand the cemetery. If I can use the phrase, the white cemetery, they were planning to expand it. And it was the north part of the cemetery that once the Phase 1 archaeology work was being done, digging down, just a few feet, they began to see reddish-orange clay outlines of grave sites, so squares and rectangles, and they determined, after viewing about 67 interments, the bodies were not exhumed at all, but just going a shallow amount, that probably 40% of those were children. And there were some headstones and footstones, but no real markings, so we couldn't discern who they are. But we have a list, going back through history and looking up some of the records, we were able to determine that certain slaves died at the University of Virginia, and they had to be buried somewhere. This was a likely place.
Right.
One record indicated that servants or slaves were buried on the north side of the cemetery next to a creek close to the woods, and this is the exact site of that location. So we commemorated the cemetery in October of 2014 during a beautiful ceremony at night. A libation took place, led by the Reverend Almeda Miller from Richmond. Community members took place. A number of the ministers and others took place in this ceremony. There was a choir that sang by candlelight. We had shepherd hooks over top each of the graves with candlelight in a mason jar, and each of the participants in the ceremony walked with a jar with the light in the mason jar with light in it. It was one of the most moving experiences that I've ever had.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
And then there been other symposia, commemorations. We're working now to construct a memorial to enslaved laborers somewhere on the university grounds. So we've already made presentations to the Board of Visitors, to President Sullivan, obviously, to the university architect. And so we're working through now what's called RFQs and RFP, request for proposal, for artists or consultants to come in and give us a rendition of what a monument would look like. and make a suggestion of where it should be erected. So happy about that. And then I think we're on the forefront of progress on other buildings named after slaves. Not ready to announce that yet until it's finally approved, but we're moving in the right direction. Yeah. Further, a course on slavery was established for students to take this past January. It was oversubscribed, with people interested in learning this history. As we come upon the bicentennial 200 years of the university, we will certainly soon have the rotunda reopen, and there will be information about slavery and early life at the University of Virginia in the Visitor Center, and there will be other programs going forward. This summer, we held a cornerstone program called Summer Institute for high school students who came and learned about slavery at the university. So educating, we're doing research. We'll find more information about slaves and their contributions. Often we think, and we know how devastating, how bad slavery was in itself. Right. But these were human beings who were contributing. So the more information we can find about how they contributed, the better. Yeah. See, I told y'all this was a great man because the majority of those things going on, I know people hear about the events, but a lot of times we don't read the fine print. Right, exactly. And so, so I know a lot of the people are familiar with most of the things that you just mentioned, but didn't know who was the man behind the music. Yeah.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Charles Lewis and Maxilia Robinson, only on 101 Jams.
In the beginning, you mentioned Covington,
right?
And so for those that don't know, that is Covington, Virginia.
Yeah, that's right.
So what I'm hoping also is that it may be a listener, listening to that and saying, "Wow, he's from Covington, Virginia,"
right.
And now he's in this position. And so one of the sort of milestone moments in your young life was your time at NC State. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the impact you had there?
We sure will. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in Covington. My wife grew up in Clifton Forge, Virginia. We went to rival high schools.
Wow.
I knew her because, she was a beautiful cheerleader, and I'm playing football and basketball, et cetera, but I don't think she would give me time of day until later in life. But anyway, the high school I went to was Watson High School, right across the street from where I grew up. My class size was 40, 20 boys, 20 girls. You got to do everything. You play in the band. I tell folks stories about how I would be on the football team. I'm quarterback on offense. It's halftime. Have my cleats on. I'm playing my trumpet, entertaining the crowd. I go into the locker room, eat an orange, talk to the coach 5 minutes, go back out. And on defense, I'm a safety. And so you have to do a lot. But the thing about that is it's kind of hard to hone in on your skills when you're doing that and all the different sports that they have to offer. But for me, it gave me opportunity, gave me insight, and I was talking to one of my sons today about how growing up to be a man and that mentorship, particularly being in a community where I had 2 older brothers, I had cousins, and all my teachers in school were African-American. I had quite a few African-American males, and they wouldn't let you get away with stuff. Right. They would tell you when you were out of line, and so I had people to look up to make sure that I was going the right path. And my church, Pine Street Baptist Church, was just 1 block down the street. So it was a nicely neat, contained community, and if you do anything wrong, somebody knows before you even get home. Yeah. So, when it's my senior year, one of the counselors in high school said, your dad worked as a laborer at the paper mill, and my dad had 6th grade education. My mom had a high school education. She finished high school, but she couldn't go to college. I mean, her mother raised about 18 kids. It's like a blended family. My mom's father died on the railroad when she was just a young girl, so there was no money for them to go to college. But she was determined that she was going to send her 5 kids to college, including me. I was one of 3 boys, and then there were 2 sisters. So the counselor at the high school said, why don't you apply for this scholarship at NC State? It's pulp and paper technology. I said, what, pulp and paper technology? I'm not sure I want to do that. But, I knew that I loved science. Yeah, right. So I said, okay, let me look into it. And sure enough, I applied, and 2 students from the area would get scholarships. So I was the first African-American to get a scholarship to NC State. Pulp and paper technology. But I think I know he spoke with me. He said, you can add something to this called chemical engineering, which I did. And so I ended up with a 5-year major. Pulp and paper technology was for the first 4 years, and then with the additional year, chemical engineering. degree. So I got 2 Bachelor of Science degrees at NC State. But in my second year, I wanted to participate in sports, so I walked on the football team and became the first African American to walk on or to play football at NC State.
Right.
And
right.
in 1968, we were ACC champions. At that time, they weren't recognizing champions, but just about 3 or 4 years ago, it was the time that Virginia was playing NC State down in Raleigh, and so our 1968 team went on the field, and we were recognized, and we got our rings, championship rings. So I was a defensive back. I wasn't a superstar. I played a lot on kickoff teams and that type of thing, and got to get in the game if we were winning big or losing big. But it was the experience. And then in later life, I was asked to come and be a member of the Board of Visitors at NC State by a good friend of mine who was the mascot back during the day.
Wow.
A guy named Arturo Hernandez Pajilla, a Hispanic fellow. And so we were roommates, and he was the wolf. And later on, he became an assistant to the president. Wow. And he invited me to come back to be on the Board of Visitors.
Isn't that something?
Yep. Small world.
It is.
Yeah. And, I worked as a chemical engineer in Covington, Virginia every summer when I was in college. And then for 2 years after I got my chemical engineering degree. And I was a DJ also at WXCF in Clifton Forge. I used to play jazz on Sundays and, popular music at nighttime.
Yeah. Now, is that station still there? Has it changed formats?
I think it changed formats a few times, and I believe the station is still there. Yeah. I haven't listened to this too much of a distance to listen to it, but I had a lot of fun there. I was Mighty Marty.
Mighty Marty, okay.
I was spinning and grinning. That was my handle, and when I'd finish up the show every night, I'd say, "Good night, Sugar Bear, wherever you are." Sugar Bear was become my eventual wife. Was my sort of a woman that I really liked in high school, but she didn't know much about me because we were going to rival high schools. So that's my wife Donna. She was the Sugar Bear. I knew where she was. She was on her grandma's porch waiting for me to come by after the show.
Okay, so they could pick up the station in their neighboring county as well.
So it was right in Clifton Forge. That was Donna's
her hometown.
And Covington is 10 miles apart. So we were only 10 miles apart. Yeah, gotcha. Right. It was, and then after that, it was 1973, Donna and I both went to Norfolk. She went to Old Dominion University to finish her education, and I was in the very first class at Eastern Virginia Medical School. I was in the charter class, so 24 students, got my MD in 3 years, and then went on into public health service in New York and Indian health service in New Mexico, and then did my residence in Cincinnati, and then Allegheny General Hospital, and then here to Charlottesville. So been very fortunate. I've had a lot of opportunities. I'm very thankful, and I thank God for those opportunities.
So let me ask you though, for that Indian healthcare piece, was that something that was federally ran, or was that a private group that was taking care of Native Americans? Because I'm curious of thinking about the time frame that you were in, and when it came to what African Americans were going through, and then for there to be that much attention towards Native American healthcare is something that's new to me. So so what was the driving force?
It certainly was government run. So I became a lieutenant in the United States Public Health Service, and with Public Health Service I could serve in a shortage area. And the first year was in Staten Island, New York, where I actually did internships. You would think that's not a shortage area, but it was didn't have enough doctors to take care of immigrants, postal workers, young, healthy people, anybody who was government related, but mainly immigrants coming in. So I had that opportunity. Another opportunity would be to go to a shortage area like the Navajo Reservation, Indian Health Service, and that's all government run as well. My oldest daughter actually was born on the Navajo Reservation in Gallup Indian Medical Center. So I was a general medical officer taking care of folks who would come in the emergency department or, on various services at the time, helping the surgeons with appendectomies or removal of gallbladders. Because of the diet out there, gallstones are very common in young people as well as the elderly. And so it was a wonderful experience, and that I think helped put me on the track of thinking outside the box, being more into other cultures as opposed to just my own. It takes the eccentricity away from just thinking about one side of the equation, but thinking more broadly. And I learned a lot too from the medicine man, and hopefully I imparted wisdom to the medicine man. And when I speak with students, I tell them about one example of a baby who came into the emergency department with signs of meningitis, but the family didn't want her admitted because they didn't want an IV attached. And they had the right to take the baby wherever they wanted to, so they took to a medicine man in a Hogan. And the medicine man would sing chants and draw sand paintings on the ground and throw them up to the air to drive out evil spirits. That's sort of the practice. Unfortunately, that child didn't survive, and so I'm thinking about what are the options, in that situation. I'm a young physician, not really sure what to do in the hospital setting itself. Has this practice to allow folks to do what they want to do. It's their right. But I've learned, a lot about sensitivity and what to do in complex situations like that over time. And I try to impart that wisdom about perhaps how maybe gaining the confidence of having a nurse go to the Hogan to give an IM injection of antibiotic as opposed to IV, little things like that. But it's all about communication and respecting others' wishes, but also putting some options in front of people.
Right, yeah.
And I think we need to do more and more of that. And so just completed a book last year, Diversity and Inclusion in Quality Patient Care. And we have some cases in the book about whether it's related to religion or related to race, ethnicity, community norms, or various practices, how people in healthcare, we can try to go by the book in terms of the numbers, and this is the way it's always done, but there needs to be flexibility. It needs to be more outside the box thinking, and sometimes being immersed in another culture, like the Navajo Nation where I was immersed. I learned a lot about different people, language, the approach to pain, and it's valuing life, a lot deeper than just if I had been just staying in the traditional health system.
Right.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Charles Lewis and Maxilia Robinson, only on 101 Jams.
A little more poignantly with the University of Virginia,
Right.
And I heard you mention, for instance, the naming of the dorms and things like that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to us, having an office such as yours, equity and diversity, and we look at the history in the past that that has a great impact in leading us to where we are today. What would you want your legacy to be to really sort of mend the fences that we have here, particularly at the university, when it comes to to the African American plight, and make sure that there's true equity?
Yeah. Well, I've certainly gotten some earthly awards and recognition at the national level. I was president of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine, president of the Council of Residency Directors, which is a national organization, and the diversity group within Society for Academic Emergency Medicine named a leadership award, a national award after me, the Marcus L. Martin Leadership Award. So that's there, and there are a number of emergency medicine physicians who were students once and then became residents, et cetera, that I mentored. And so in terms of legacy, I think it's about mentorship. It's about not about me, but about others. It's about giving and giving back. The patient care, I want people to think that I was a man that cared about community and other people, and I certainly care about my family, my children, my wife, my grandkids. But the legacy is a person who tried his best working with others to synergize change so that we would have a welcoming climate here at the University of Virginia and in the Charlottesville community, and beyond that, with some of the writings that I've had, as I said, a book that I published last year, and another one on West Indies healthcare and disaster preparedness. One thing I didn't talk about, I take students to St. Kitts and Nevis in January for a January term and teach them about a different culture, or they learn about different culture because they're immersed in that culture, the Caribbean culture. And we work with the Ministry of Health and lay out certain plans for drills like fire drills and mass casualty drills to help the EMTs and the Ministry of Health approach their work better in terms of caring for people. So legacy that, I cared about people. I tried to do my best from the healthcare perspective and from the community overall, making it a better place for everybody.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great work as always. And
Thank you.
I appreciate you just taking the time to stop by and chat with us and informing the people of all the great work that's been done and being done. And hopefully they'll look up the office and the website and get involved and support the great functions that you have going on.
Thank you. And I thank God for giving me the energy and waking me up every morning so I can do this type of work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Martin, thank you.
Okay.